What if I told you that just a few decades ago, in the so-called golden age of air travel, flying was one of the riskiest things you could do? From windows that could explode mid-air to planes that were known to simply fall apart. By the end of this video, you won't believe anyone ever stepped onto these things. Number 15, the spin-proof plane that spun out of control. Kicking off our list is a plane that was actually marketed as the safest and easiest to fly, the Ercoupe. Introduced in the 1940s and popular through the 50s, its big selling point was a simplified control system with no rudder pedal. This was supposed to make it spin-proof, a family car for the skies. The problem wasn't the plane itself, but the false confidence it gave people. Its marketing attracted pilots who thought they were invincible. They'd fly into bad weather, convinced the plane's safe design would protect them. This led to a deadly phenomenon called Scud running, where pilots would fly dangerously low to stay under the clouds, often flying directly into terrain they couldn't see. The supposedly safest plane developed a surprisingly poor safety record for the era. The Ercoupe became a hard lesson that no amount of clever engineering can make up for bad judgment, a theme we'll see over and over again. Number 14. The Dr. Killer. Imagine a sports car so sleek and fast that it was just too much for most people to handle. That was the Beechcraft Bonanza 35. With its distinctive V-tail and clean aerodynamics, it was way faster than almost any other single-engine plane out there. Wealthy professionals, especially doctors, flocked to buy it, earning it the grim nickname, the Dr. Killer. The very things that made it fast also made it unforgiving. Its slippery design meant it could build up speed, like a rocket in a dive, and its unique tail was prone to a dangerous wobble called flutter if you didn't handle it perfectly. Inexperienced pilots, stepping up from slower planes, would lose control, often getting into spins they couldn't recover from. The Bonanza demanded a level of skill that many of its amateur owners just didn't have. It's a stark reminder that speed means nothing without control. Number 13, the Scud running epidemic. We mentioned Scud running with the Ercoupe, but it was a full-blown epidemic in the 1950s and 60s. Before GPS, advanced weather radars, and widespread instrument training, pilots had very few tools to navigate bad weather. Often, the only tool they had was their own eyesight. When faced with a low layer of clouds, many pilots would make the fatal choice to fly underneath it, hugging the ground. They were literally running from the Scud, fast-moving clouds. This put them at extreme risk of what's known as controlled flight into terrain, where a perfectly good airplane is flown right into the ground, a mountain, or an obstacle. Planes like the popular Cessna 170 suffered from these kinds of weather-related accidents. There were no terrain warning system, no digital maps, just a pilot, a compass, and a prayer. Number 12, car-style seatbelts and zero crashworthiness. If you were in a plane crash in the 1950s or 60s, your chances of surviving were shockingly low, and not just because of the impact. For decades, airplanes, especially smaller ones, were designed with almost zero thought given to crashworthiness. The entire focus was on preventing the crash, not surviving it. Most planes only had simple lap belts, just like old cars. Shoulder harnesses, which are crucial for preventing head injuries, were basically unheard of until the late 1970s. The seats themselves would often rip free from their mountings, turning into projectiles inside the cabin. As basic safety features, like shoulder harnesses and stronger cabin structures were introduced, survival rates went up dramatically. Today, aircraft seats and airframes are built to withstand incredible G-forces, giving passengers a chance in what would have been an unsurvivable crash just a few decades ago. Number 11, the Dutch roll nightmare. Imagine you're on a flight and the plane starts to wag its tail from side to side. Then, that wagging turns into a sickening, corkscrewing roll all on its own. This terrifying motion is called Dutch roll, and it was a massive problem for the first swept-wing jets of the 1950s. A perfect example was the Martin X B-51, a prototype bomber from the early 50s. It was fast and looked like it was from the future, but its swept wings made it dangerously prone to Dutch roll. Once the oscillation began, it could become uncontrollable, sometimes causing the plane to break apart in mid-air. Pilots found it nearly impossible to correct by hand. One of the XB-51 prototypes was lost in exactly this kind of incident. Today, every single swept-wing airliner has a device called a yaw damper. It's an automatic system that senses the start of a Dutch roll and uses the rudder to cancel it out before the pilots even feel it, constantly taming the wild instabilities that plagued early jets. Number 10, the self-cooking bomber. Meet the Martin P-6M Seamaster, a 1950s prototype for a nuclear bomber that could take off and land on water. It was a wild idea meant to give the Navy a bomber that didn't need vulnerable land bases. It was also a flying death trap. The Seamaster had 4 jet engines mounted on top of its wings, but they were angled slightly inward. This created a huge problem. When the pilots hit the afterburners for maximum power, the super hot exhaust plumes would blast directly onto the rear of the plane, literally melting its own tail. As you can guess, this led to catastrophic failures. The second prototype completely disintegrated in mid-air when the afterburners cooked the tail, causing a total loss of control. The idea of a strategic bomber that destroyed itself with its own engines was, thankfully, scrapped. Number 9. The Wild West of experimental aircraft. The 1950s through 70s weren't just dangerous for commercial flying. It was a wild west for amateur-built planes. The spirit of innovation was great, but the lack of oversight led to a scary number of accidents. Enthusiasts would build radical new designs in their garages, often with unproven engines and materials. Certification standards were loose, and many of these planes would crash on their first few flights. Even in the early 2000s, experimental aircraft had a fatal accident rate, shockingly similar to the overall rates for all of general aviation back in the 1950s. Today, the experimental category is far more structured. Builders have access to better designs, reliable parts, and a wealth of shared knowledge, with much stricter testing protocols to prove a plane is safe before it can fly freely. Number 8. The unregulated danger in the cargo hold. A fire on an airplane is one of the most feared scenarios in aviation. Now imagine that fire being fed by unknown, volatile, and even explosive materials hidden in the cargo hold. In the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, this was a terrifyingly common risk. Before strict regulations, there was almost no oversight on shipping hazardous materials on passenger flights. Chemical companies could ship corrosive liquids, manufacturers could transport flammable gases, and all sorts of dangerous goods could end up in the belly of a plane without the crew ever knowing. In a crash, these unregulated materials would often rupture, turning a survivable accident into an inferno. It wasn't until major accidents, like the 1973 crash of Pan Am Flight 160, caused by improperly packaged nitric acid, that regulators finally took action. Today, the transport of dangerous goods is one of the most heavily regulated parts of aviation, a direct lesson learned from the fiery wrecks of the past. Number 7. The chaos of the piston-to-jet transition. The jet age promised speed and glamour, but its arrival in the 1950s also brought a wave of destruction. The problem was that the pilots flying these new, incredibly complex machines were often trained on much slower, simpler piston engine aircraft. The leap in technology was massive, and the training just couldn't keep up. Seasoned pilots with thousands of hours in propeller planes found themselves dangerously behind the airplane, in the cockpit of a Boeing 707 or DC-8. Jet engines responded differently. Speeds were much higher, and emergencies could develop in a fraction of the time. The result was a spike in accidents caused by pilot error. For example, early jets like the Boeing 727 had a fatal accident rate in their first years that was many times higher than modern aircraft. This chaos led to a crucial innovation in aviation safety, crew resource management, or CRM. This new training philosophy shifted focus from the captain as an unquestionable god to a team-based approach, encouraging co-pilots to speak up and catch error. This, along with advanced simulators, finally tamed the deadly transition to the jet age. Number 6. The deadliest day in aviation history. On March 27, 1977, on the Spanish island of Tenerife, two fully loaded Boeing 747s collided on a foggy runway, killing 583 people. It is still the deadliest accident in aviation history, and it was caused almost entirely by something we take for granted today: standardized communication. A nearby incident had forced several large jets to divert to the small Los Rodeos airport, which quickly became gridlocked. A KLM 747 and a Pan Am 747 were both told to use the single main runway to taxi. As dense fog rolled in, the KLM captain, a respected senior pilot, was in a hurry to leave. This is where it all went wrong. Air traffic control gave the KLM plane its departure route clearance, which the captain misinterpreted as a clearance for takeoff. His co-pilot meekly questioned the decision, but was shut down. The KLM jumbo jet began its takeoff roll, hurtling down the foggy runway, right at the Pan Am 747. The collision was catastrophic. This disaster exposed the lethal danger of non-standard radio phrases and a strict cockpit hierarchy, leading directly to mandatory CRM training and the rigid standardized English phrases used in aviation today. Number 5. Safety delegated to the builders. How did so many dangerous planes get certified to fly in the first place? In the boom years of the 1960s and 70s, the Federal Aviation Administration was stretched incredibly thin. The number of new complex jetliners being developed was overwhelming, so they delegated. Under a program called Designated Engineering Representative, the FAA allowed manufacturers like McDonnell Douglas to essentially self-certify large parts of their own aircraft. The company's own engineers would sign off on the safety of their work on the government's behalf. This created a huge conflict of interest. The pressure to cut costs and speed up production was immense. This system is how the DC-10, a plane we'll discuss next, was certified with foreseeable failure modes being overlooked. Following a series of horrific accidents in the 1970s, this system was heavily reformed, with the FAA taking a much more direct role in certifying aircraft safety. Number 4. The invisible, unrecoverable stall. On May 25, 1979, American Airlines Flight 191, a DC-10, took off from Chicago O'Hare. Just as it left the ground, its left engine completely ripped off the wing, flipped up over the top, and smashed onto the runway. The plane climbed, banked sharply to the left, and then nosedived into the ground, killing all 271 people on board and 2 on the ground. It remains the deadliest single-plane accident on U.S. soil. The investigation revealed a terrifying domino effect. When the engine ripped off due to improper maintenance, it severed hydraulic lines that controlled the slats on the front of the wing. This caused the slats on the left wing to retract, dramatically increasing the speed at which that wing would stall. The pilots, following procedure for an engine failure, slowed the plane down, unknowingly dropping below the new higher stall speed for the damaged left wing. But the most lethal part was what the pilots didn't know. The power for the slat warning light and the captain's stick shaker, the device that physically warns of a stall, came from the very engine that had just fallen off. The pilots had no warning. They were flying blind into an unrecoverable situation. In response, regulations were changed to mandate redundant power sources for critical warning systems. Number 3. The explosive cargo door. The McDonnell Douglas DC-10 was a revolutionary jet, but its introduction was marred by a fatal design flaw: its cargo door. Unlike most planes, the DC-10's cargo doors opened outwards. This maximized cargo space, but it also meant the immense air pressure at high altitude was constantly trying to blow the door open. The door was held by locking pins, but the latching mechanism was so badly designed, it was possible for a baggage handler to close the handle without the pins fully engaging. This exact thing had already caused a near disaster in 1972 on American Airlines Flight 96, where a cargo door blew out mid-flight. Miraculously, the pilots landed the plane. McDonnell Douglas issued a fix, but it wasn't mandatory. Then, on March 3, 1974, Turkish Airlines Flight 981 took off from Paris. The cargo door wasn't properly latched. As the plane climbed, the door blew out. The explosive decompression caused the cabin floor to collapse, which severed the flight control cables running through it. The pilots lost all ability to control the plane. 77 seconds later, the DC-10 slammed into a forest, killing all 346 people on board. It was, at the time, the worst air disaster in history. All DC-10s were immediately grounded and fitted with redesigned doors, a brutal lesson paid for in blood. Number 2. The glamorous jet with a ticking time bomb. In 1952, the de Havilland Comet ushered in the jet age. It was beautiful, flying higher and faster than any propeller plane. It even had large panoramic windows for passengers to enjoy the view. But those windows were square, and that simple design choice turned the world's most advanced airliner into a ticking time bomb. The problem was a phenomenon not well understood at the time: metal fatigue. Every time the plane was pressurized for high-altitude flight, the metal skin of the fuselage would stretch just a tiny bit. On descent, it would relax. This cycle, repeated over and over, created stress. On a smooth surface, that stress is spread out, but the sharp, 90-degree corners of the Comet's square windows concentrated all that stress in one spot. Microscopic cracks began to form at these corners, growing a tiny fraction of an inch with every single flight. In 1954, within a year of each other, 2 comets disintegrated in midair, killing everyone on board. Investigators, in a pioneering feat of forensic engineering, rebuilt the wreckage and found the horrific truth. The fuselage was tearing apart, starting at the corner of a window. From that moment on, every single pressurized aircraft has been designed with round or oval windows, a simple, elegant solution to the deadly problem of square corners. Number 1. The sky-high fatal accident rates. The single most dangerous feature of old airplanes wasn't one single part. It was the entire environment in which they operated. An era of routine danger, accepted risk, and appallingly high accident rates. The numbers are hard to wrap your head around from our modern perspective. As we said at the start, the fatal accident rate for the first US and Canadian jets in 1959 was around 40 per million departures. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, this had improved, but rates of 2 to 3 fatal accidents per million departures were still common for first-generation jets. For comparison, the rate in the modern era is typically below 0.2. This means that in the golden age, you were statistically at least 10 to 200 times more likely to be in a fatal crash than you are today. Jets were crashing routinely. A look at the accident lists from the era is a sobering read of fires, structural failures, and mid-air collisions. Flying wasn't just a trip, it was a gamble. There was no single cause, but a systemic combination of unproven technology, inadequate training, primitive navigation, and lax regulation that made every flight a risk. From explosive windows and self-destructing doors to a complete lack of basic warnings, the early decades of air travel were an astonishingly dangerous time. The planes were marvels of a new age, but they were also flawed experiments, flying on the very edge of what was understood about engineering and aerodynamics. Which of these features did you find the most terrifying? Let us know in the comments below.